So our mind doesn't really scan and remember the whole of an experience, but it will remember the peaks.
Yes.
And unfortunately, it will remember the negative more than it will remember the positive, because that's how our brains are wired.
Hello and welcome to a whole new episode of Engati CX. I'm your host, and today we have the amazing Martin Hill Wilson with us. But before we dive into the entire interview, allow me to first introduce you to the magic of Engati. Engati is the world's leading multilingual no-code chatbot platform, available across 14 channels with 30,000 bots created across 186 countries in every domain and use case. Engati has also been recognized as a top platform by Inc.com, TechWorld, CIO, and many others. We run the Engati blog, the video channel, and the Engati CX podcast, receiving upwards of 300,000 visitors annually. And now for our amazing guest. Martin Hill Wilson is a mentor to customer leaders, and he designs micro-learning experiences. These are focused on evolving the customer strategies and personal skills of leaders and their teams. He's also an active chair, keynote speaker, and awards judge in anything centered around the customer. Customer engagement, customer service, customer experience, the works. He has 30 years of learning to offer value-based consulting assignments, anything that involves an organization's ability to increase the value of their customers and employees. But before we get all these amazing insights from Martin himself, I have a quick announcement for all of y'all. We have something special for all of you, so stick around to the end of the interview and you'll get your free gift. Martin, we're really thrilled to have you with us today.
Thank you very much. It's a delight to be with you. And that was a really interesting introduction that you gave there. And clearly you're sitting in the middle of a very dynamic market right now.
Absolutely. Martin, let's dive into this.
Okay, so the thing I'd like to talk to you all about today is something that I've been focused on for the last couple of years now, which is within the broader marketplace of customer experience, which, as we all know, has pretty much become central to many organizations' growth strategy, is the focus on emotion. And I've taken an aspect of that, and I've really sort of packaged up and focused it on customer interaction. And customer interaction, from my point of view, is any form of engagement that a customer has with an organization, mainly live, and I'm mainly thinking about voice, or I'm thinking about text. It could probably be focused upon a contact center environment as a touch point. It could involve service engineers, people that actually, back in the old world, who used to go out and visit people, probably doing it virtually in today's world. It could have been retail. That could be another touch point as well. But my own personal background is very much customer service. I was involved in the very first wave of contact centers here in the UK back in the day. And that's always been a touch point for me. And it struck me that, the industry generally has always focused upon efficiency, output, productivity, lowest cost delivery, all of those sorts of bits and pieces. And I have, to some degree, felt uncomfortable about that, way of being framed and the mindset that goes with that. And I came across a piece of research, actually, about 2-3 years ago, that said emotionally engaged customers are worth twice as much.
Absolutely.
And that was a marketing-led piece of research. And I thought, well, wouldn't that be interesting if we applied that same logic to customer service? And, if we think about it, and it's very logical, and there's a lot of research that supports it, basically, if you have a poor customer experience, particularly in the context of service, you feel pushed away from an organization. If you have a positive one, you feel stronger. And there's lots of evidence that shows over time, if those service experiences remain negative, you as a customer in today's world are going to walk away from that organization. So simply put, we as customers expect not just the functional outcome any longer, getting the job done. We also expect it to be as easy as possible. We all know that. That's what digital transformation has been about, reducing customer effort. But the final bit, and this has not been well attended to, is how we feel. And how we feel absolutely determines the way that we will assess you as an organization. So you look at your NPS score, your customer satisfaction, your effort score even, you will find that those scores are directly influenced by the way in which I feel. Now, so what? You know, we knew that. We've got lots of people in our contact centers who are empathetic. My point was, I don't think that we do that yet as a management discipline. Yeah, we might be blessed with a few individuals who are good at it, but we don't really bother to manage it, measure it, improve it systematically, because each and every interaction we have, you've either built further loyalty or you've stretched that to the point of potentially being broken. So in summary, Emotive CX for customer interaction is all about developing a management discipline where you can systematically improve the outcome of every single interaction you have, and therefore start to contribute to an organization's bigger commercial activities, such as keeping customers longer, such as stopping them leaving, such as being more likely to buy more, advocacy, and all those kind of good bits and pieces. And to me, it was important that we had the contact center directly plugged into that bigger CX picture. So that's what I've been doing for the last 18 months.
Martin, I love what you said about, let me put it my way. I think that great customer experience, that's what the best marketing is all about. Because if you have an amazing experience, they're going to come back. They're going to be bringing more people along with them. So Martin, my question to you is, how can Emotive CX actually influence customer behavior?
Okay, so there's some interesting work that's been done in behavioral psychology and also in neuroscience. And one interesting thing, which again is really key to understand in CX, is there is a difference between what we design as an experience and what we as customers subsequently take away and remember about that experience. And those two worlds are not the same. And this is work that has been done by a guy who a lot of people will probably be familiar with, who's called Daniel Kahneman. And he produced insights into theories which have now become called System 1, System 2 thinking, whole thing about cognitive bias. And one of the things that in the middle of that conversation he produced was this idea called the peak end rule. And he based this actually on some research from patients in hospital. And he said, you know, if you have patient A and patient B, in one instance, they suffered post-operative pain much, much less, but much more intensely than B, who had less intensity, but it lasted longer. And his question was, when you talk to those patients afterwards, who would remember it as being a better or worse experience? Which is interesting. And logic would say, well, if I'm going to suffer a long period of time, that's probably going to give me the reasons to believe it was a poor experience. But he said, no, that's not actually the case. The thing is, the person who ends with the least painful experiences uses that to form their memory of the whole event and subsequently rewrites that in their mind as being what that whole event was about. And that's the basis of the peak end rule. So if you then apply that into a customer interaction and you think about customer service, mostly we don't phone call centers because we want to go, hey, it's a great day, how are you? We do it because we have a problem. And probably, on likelihood, it's likely that we are in a somewhat negative mood for the sake of discussion. Now, where we want to get people to by the end of that call is into an appropriately positive version of that. So I'm irritated and upset, I'm reassured and confident, you know, whatever those things are. Not being listened to, by the way, is a massive thing. Still in customer service, feeling insulted, not being listened to, it's quite easy to remedy, which is a full feeling of being listened to and respected, you know, a transformative state, if you want, at the end of the day. So how we end up that call and how we navigate the customer's experience to that end is one of the skills we're talking about. And then the other thing is, within peak end, by the way, is outliers. So our mind doesn't really scan and remember the whole of an experience, but it will remember the peaks
Yes.
And unfortunately, it will remember the negative more than it will remember the positive, because that's how our brains are wired. So that little peak experience, which is negative, could be a number of things. It could be you have a lousy process that takes me onto the website, gets me to fill in my details, fine. It's a drag. I had to do it again because I'm an existing customer, and you should know that, but okay, fine. Then I get transferred to the call center, and what happens to begin with? You ask me the same stuff again. There's a good example of being irritated, and I will remember that point, particularly if the outcome isn't very efficient. So we have a number of journey-based negatives, and we might have a number of personal-based negatives, which is I'm all about efficiency as an agent. You know, I'm dead good, I'll get this thing fixed, but how you're feeling, totally missed you. You know what I mean? And you can feel at the end of the call that you've been dealt with, but somehow that person was rude. You know, you didn't feel like you were personally attended to, you were just a number, etc., etc.
No warmth in that conversation.
Yeah, you know that one as well. So what we're saying here with how it influences my behavior is if I attend to the things that you are most likely to retain as memory, and I am taught, and we measure and we reinforce all of that, you will more likely end up with a memory which is positive, and then feel more directly drawn to the brand. And again, Bruce Temkin and Forrester have done quite a lot of research showing, guess what, that, you know, customers who have an accumulation of positive are drawn to the brand, which gets reflected in later behavior, and people who have an accumulation of negative, they leave. And indeed, there's growing evidence that it only takes maybe 1 or 2 poor service experiences before a customer is going to leave that business. And the other reason to your question, why does this matter, is in a COVID world, we are all the more anxious anyway. So, you know, our emotive state is much more consciously close to the surface than it was before. And therefore, many customers need that extra human touch in a way that maybe wasn't quite so important before. So we are in a position to influence outcome in the way that I've just talked about. And that translates into the way that customers feel, the way they evaluate us, and the subsequent downstream behavior. So there you go. That's the quick answer to it.
We remember the extremes. We won't remember flat, smooth experience.
Yeah. Well, do you know, the interesting point, if you do customer experience in holidays, for instance, and if you were to buy a 2-week holiday, if nothing changed across those 2 weeks, you would not really consider that the second week was terribly valuable. Absolutely. Because the brain has nothing to compare it against. And that's why people who design holidays will deliberately give the customer a set of new experiences in the second week. So there is that point of comparison to evaluate the overall experience.
Yeah, certainly. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Martin, do you think that conversational AI and automation could actually help improve these emotive customer experiences?
Well, I think yes, in 2 ways. I'm, you know, in addition to talking the human side, I'm also a big fan of the tech, and I've done quite a lot of work on that side, going back really to a primary conversation about what's your contact mix, you know, what's your engagement strategy, and I've been a long-term critic of using humans to do low-level work. I think it's just stupid. It's expensive. It's not enjoyable for the customer. It's not enjoyable for the employee. And from the customer's point of view, you know, we shouldn't have to wait in a queue to get a simple thing sorted out. Equally, we are prepared to sit in the queue if there is a good reason for it. And my definition is as follows. If a situation is emotive, if it's complex, and if, for whatever reason, it matters to the relationship, it might be a renewal, it might be a recovery from a complaint, it might be something, but you're either going to win or lose on the relationship stakes as a result, that's when you need people. Okay? Now, how often is that the case? I, as a rule of thumb, would say of all inbound engagement, I do not believe that if you optimize everything, it should be greater than a quarter of all of that volume, 25%. All right? If you look to many contact centers right now, the amount of live engagement that is used to process those inbound inquiries is much more than 25%. It's often 50, 60, 70. And I think that a lot of the work that we've done in the last half dozen years of going digital has really gone nowhere because all we've done is swap voice for text. So what? So what? You know, you've still got a live human being. What you really should be doing is to say, and by the way, on the argument that says, oh, I can multitask on chat or messaging, my point is, if you can split your attention so easily, then the nature of the inquiry should be automated through a conversational AI or through automation, if it's that damn simple, you know, at the end of the day. So to my mind, you need to prioritize all of those types of calls and give those off to the human beings. And hence what I've been talking about, that's an upskilling thing and a management thing around Emotive CX. But then you look at the remainder. And of the remainder, I think there's three outcomes you can go for. One is get rid of that need to talk. It was irrelevant, you know, engineer it out of the business. So that's one opportunity. Second opportunity is to see the patterns of engagement. And if you can spot when a customer has a need at a certain point in a journey by time, why wait for the customer to talk to you? Why don't you proactively talk to them? Exactly. Probably the way that we most anticipate that right now is on home deliveries. Yes, somebody's going to come to you at a certain point in the day with the package. We're just letting you know that. That's an obvious thing. But there's many, many, many instances across journeys where there are more sophisticated examples of that, which again, AI allow us to see the patterns and proactively communicate. And then what we're left with is self-service. And I think there's a huge, huge, huge opportunity to grow that. Certainly in the first instance on education, if all I am doing is reading out of a knowledge base something, why am I using a human being to do that? All right. So that's the first easiest thing at the end of the day. Education, information is dead simple. And there's lots of information which again can be provided to customers if we plumb in those systems deeply into back end. So for example, where's my package? When will it arrive? Who's doing it? Can I directly contact them to say I'm no longer available? Can they do this with the package? All of those things can be accomplished through deep integration, you know, into third-party systems at the end of the day. And as a general point, what we could do with those systems, let's say 2-3 years ago versus now, has grown in sophistication as customers have got more used to it and organizations have made those experiences much, much better. So I'm a big, big optimist around of growing that, providing it's well designed, it's continuously improved, it's probably designed with customers in mind as opposed to just the business needs in mind. And I think there's a terrific amount of that inbound volume that eventually we can migrate and should migrate to self-service. So if you then reflect on that, you have a different mix, you have a much better optimization of your time and the customer's time, and you have freed up the humans to then do the most valuable work at the end of the day. How many organizations are even close to that optimization? I think very few. I think it's the beginnings of that journey, but the potential is huge, and the cost of doing business in a COVID world has got to be dramatically reimagined. So there's a huge opportunity for conversational AI.
Absolutely. Why would a company want to waste its resources to just read something of their knowledge base when either you're going to waste your employees' time or you're going to waste your customers' time? When you could just have someone, a bot, deliver the relevant information to them right away without wasting anyone's time. It's much more efficient.
And by the way, as a subset, I should have also said that I think automation dovetails into that very closely. So, you know, often we think of automating complete journeys, but I think within journeys, there are bits that don't have to be done manually as well. Yeah. And that applies as much to the advisor as it does to the customer at the end of the day. And I should also probably say that, you know, our digital assistants of the future are going to be as much for employees as for customers. Yeah. You know, one of the big wastes of time is, where is it? You know, and the bigger you get as an organization, and particularly startups, I've had a lot of interesting conversations recently. listening to organizations that have worked tribally in their own little teams, built their own knowledge resources, sitting on Google Drives and all sorts of local systems. But the ability for others to tap into that is severely limited at the end of the day. And there's this core question of where is it? And if you don't, by the way, have an answer to that question, you have to escalate that to a human being at the end of the day. So automation and discovery of those assets really does go hand in hand with developing the conversational interface that the customers also feel comfortable with engaging with. So it's a complete strategy really around of information management, but also the automation of the manual tasks in a given journey.
Absolutely, make the customer's life a million times easier. Okay, Martin, what changes can Emotive CX bring about in an organization? How can it help organizations perform better, be more efficient, treat the customers and their employees better?
Well, I think that COVID is going to get people, particularly with the associated recession that sits with that. And I've been talking about this now for a good couple of months, and I know governments are all keen to talk it up, and that's their job. Whether or not a recession is going to look like a V, or it's going to look like a U, going to look like a W, or it's going to look even worse than that, remains to be seen. I think a lot of it is to do with, are we going to, as a world, duplicate what, let's take New Zealand as a good example right now, and get the pandemic to a point where actually life almost comes back to complete normalcy? Are we going to find that if you ignore all of the health stuff, you're out of control, which as we speak is probably exemplified by the US right now?
Yep.
Are we going to imagine that it's a one-time only pandemic, which is what Beijing and South Korea is currently experiencing? And what are we going to do as a result of that? And I think it's going to take some time before we all decide on what the truth of that matter is going to be, whether vaccines are going to deal with it or not. And therefore, we're going to go up and down in terms of those economic cycles at the end of the day. So what organizations are going to have to do as a result of that is to prepare themselves for a much tighter growth environment. And indeed, some sectors are going to be permanently in the slow lane or even damaged. By the way, if you're in the sector you're in and others associated with that, you're growing like crazy. So, for a lot of people, it's a question of we're not going to, unfortunately, be able to take people back out of furlough or whatever that language is across the world. We're going to have to do more with less at the end of the day to reduce those budgets. So one of my answers is that we need to find a way in the customer service context of delivering great customer experience at a much, much, much lower cost base. And that much, much, much lower cost base, unfortunately, is highly associated with headcount. It's still 70–80% of the budget around of headcount. If you take that as a broader enterprise issue, the same thing applies. So you can look at it in a number of ways. If you're growth orientated, keep the people you've got, but have an expectation that their output and their productivity doubles, quadruples, because A, you've stopped wasting time, and B, you've made them smarter and more effective in the jobs that they're doing. And as a general statement, and it's a very general statement, automation, AI technologies, of which bots are one manifestation, are all to do with becoming more effective at the end of the day. The world I'm currently focused on, Emotive, although I've talked about it in terms of customer interaction, of course, it applies just as much to employees because we're all human. And the center of that, it's saying that we are, as humans, we are emotive beings, and a lot of our motivation and a lot of our willingness to, do things comes out of being recognized as someone who has feelings and someone who needs purpose and to be motivated. And I think that, again, businesses are going to have to build their abilities in that area if they're going to have highly effective workforces that don't burn out. I mean, right now, one interesting problem is nobody's taking holidays. Everyone's too scared. Everyone's deferring that because they hope that they're not going to be the people that are going to be put, out of work at the end of the day. But it's not going to be sustainable beyond a certain period, everyone working like this. So we're going to have to move from working harder, to working smarter. And I think the world that you're currently working in, which is to automate, and the world that I'm working in, which is to recognize the emotive dimension, they're both pretty important strategies for helping organizations change the way that they function.
Certainly, certainly. Martin, do you have any other thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience today?
Well, the only other one is the work, again, that I've been doing. I was running the course as a 6-month program. And I think that in today's world, that's just too long. So, getting to a pilot for this, I've now reduced down to 5 weeks. I've stripped out a ton of stuff. And that seems to me to be very much in line with a lot of the feedback you hear now about digital transformation. I'm sure you're being challenged to get your proof of concept, systems up and running in a very, very short space of time, simply because the world at large is changing, customer needs are changing, organizations are having to pivot very much more rapidly. So I think that from my point of view, time to value has accelerated, get that up and running in 5 weeks. But in terms of the need for emotive customer service, I think it's never been greater. Even pre-COVID, there was a very clear relationship between loyalty and value and emotion. Post-COVID, in an anxious world, if organizations don't recognize that, they're going to find those customers leave very much faster. So it's a skill that people need to invest in, and I think is absolutely relevant at this point in time for customer service, sales, and even marketing engagement at the end of the day. So that would be my concluding thoughts.
Martin, your insights have been really valuable, really brilliant. Where can the audience reach out to you?
Right. Okay. So the website is probably one of the easy ones, which is Brainfood Consulting, brainfoodconsulting.com. If you go and look for Martin Hill Wilson on LinkedIn, I kind of replicate a lot of that activity there as well. And it's pretty easy if you want to link in with me. I've got email and phone numbers and all the rest of it. And I'd be delighted if anybody, as a result of this, wants to engage with me. Just let me know that we started on this conversation together, and that will be absolutely fine. And actually, you said that there were some prizes and for sitting at the end of this.
I do have a surprise for all of them.
Yeah. Okay.
So our new ebook, The Evolution of Customer Experience, is out. It's available for all of you to download for free. So hit the link in the description and you'll get it.
Fantastic.
You also do need to reach out to Martin. He is brilliant.
Okay. Well, I'll read that too. That sounds inspiring stuff.
I will send you a copy, Martin.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise, Engati CX will be back with a new episode and new expert really soon. So stay tuned, guys.